Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our Chief Science Advisor, Dr. Yu, and our Seed Oil Survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, aneighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. Well, I'm excited to have my guest today on A Neighbor's Choice. He's someone that I enjoy talking to because he's got a good knack for kind of hitting the nerve of where we're at culturally. Is our friend, a writer at Substack, Chris Bray. How you doing, sir?
Doing good. How are you?
Doing great. And it's great to have you back. You have this piece here on your Substack, chrisbray.substack.com, Why Culture War is Everything. And, it's kind of dealing with Gavin Newsom and some of this stuff that he's drumming up. So, why is the culture war everything? There's a lot of people that debate this and they say, well, it's actually economics is the foundation of what's driving culture. That's kind of a Marxist interpretation, but also libertarian. Some of them share that view that it's economics driving things. And other people say, no, it's culture. And I kind of see it as maybe both kind of fused together. Maybe there's something else underneath both of them, but tell me a little bit about what you're thinking here with this
I
idea.
so I if you watch our governor, Gavin Newsom, he spends a lot of time. He spends all of his time apparently traveling to red states and confronting the evil and bigotry of the red states and tweeting about Gavin Newsom banning books just like Adolf Hitler and Greg Abbott in Texas and what a disaster the red states are and what a repressive culture they have. And
Yeah.
he picks all these fights. There was the famous there's a poet named Amanda Gorman who wrote a really tedious poem that she read at Barack Obama's inauguration. And her poem was supposedly banned by a school in Florida, and the giant manufactured crisis over it was that she moved her poem was moved from the elementary school shelves at a K through 8 campus to the middle school shelves.
Yeah.
And for like a week, we had this, fascism on the march, books being banned. Can you even read poems in Florida schools? Can you even say gay in Florida? I say, like, why is the governor of California mostly talking about Florida and Texas, mostly talking about cultural issues? If you look around California, we have a sort of one functioning investigative reporter left in Los Angeles, a guy named David Goldstein, who does brilliant stuff, who's a TV news investigative reporter. And he went and found records of and drove around looking at infrastructure for the freeways in Los Angeles and found that about 40,000 of our freeway lights, I forget what percentage that is, but it's something like half, don't work and haven't worked for years. And he found community groups that have been begging Caltrans to fix their, like the lights on their off-ramp, their heavily trafficked off-ramp for 5 years, and they can't even get anyone at Caltrans to talk to them. And he pulled employment records for Caltrans and found that as Caltrans loses more and more and more traffic lights, they have fewer and fewer and fewer electric repair employees. So sort of everything in California is falling apart. The lights don't work and there's no one to fix them. We started building, I don't remember the year, I think it was something like 2008. We approved the idea of funding a bullet train that would connect Los Angeles and the Bay Area, and it would cost $30 billion, and you could jump on the train in LA and be, whisked away at 250 miles an hour to San Francisco in a couple hours or less. And here we are in 2023. We've spent tens of billions of dollars on it. We don't have a single mile of track. No one knows when we'll have any track. They've scaled the project back and scaled it back and scaled it back. So it's not going to connect LA and San Francisco anymore. It's going to connect, a couple of small remote cities in the Central Valley. We don't know when. We don't know how much it'll cost. It'll cost over $100 billion, but nobody knows exactly how much from the original $30 billion estimate. So as less and less works, as more and more falls apart, as the streets are dirtier and the streets are unpaved, and homeless encampments grow and grow and grow, and drug addiction grows and grows and grows, and people are dying of fentanyl overdoses on the streets of Los Angeles and San Francisco. Gavin Newsom is talking about book bans in Florida.
Yeah.
And for me, I've really struggled. I just went a week without writing anything. And, felt badly about it and was watching people unsubscribe. When you go silent, you can see your subscriber numbers declining. But I just have this overwhelming sense all the time now, and Gavin Newsom is the figurehead for this, that what we talk about in public, that what you see on Twitter, that what you see in the news headlines, isn't what's happening. It's what people say to keep you from noticing what's happening.
Yeah.
And trans everything, and trans children, and Scott Wiener. I don't know if people all over the country know about the California Senator Scott Wiener, who's sort of on Twitter every day saying, we have to fight for trans children because LGBT people are being exterminated.
Yeah.
Stirring up this just insane culture war nonsense that has no connection to anything that's really happening. And I think increasingly that we do that we talk about, Pride Month 50 times a day because things are falling apart. Nobody knows how to fix the things that are falling apart. We're going to, grind Russia down and defeat them in Ukraine, but it doesn't really look like we have a plan to do that or to finish it. And it increasingly looks like we're grinding down Ukraine instead of Russia. We've financialized the economy. We have, we're closing in on federal debt at 200% of GDP. So let's talk about transgender children and poems being moved from one library shelf to another. Yeah. It feels like we live in a period when everything is fake.
Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly how it seems. And, it reminds me of this, some Twitter thread that I think a progressive guy posted named Swan Marcus. He said, one thing that blows my mind is how little serious investigative journalism right-wing media does. Conservative media would be so much more valuable if they really dug into West Coast political corruption instead of spewing endless hot takes about wokeness. He says, I know that people will be like, well, that's the clickbait their readers want, but a conservative magazine could have readership outside of just the right if they were producing better journalism that supported conservative ends. Seems like a better way to advance your agenda. He says, I personally know so much crazy stuff about what West Coast progressives are doing that I never see mentioned in National Review. How has National Review never reported on the fact that the world's largest AIDS foundation is a NIMBY slush fund that violates finance laws? He says, I learned so much more effed up stuff about California from normie libs who live there than I do from any conservative media organization. Libs in California let me know a bunch of leftist initiatives and organized by a guy gaming the housing subsidy program to make millions of dollars. And Seattle and Portland regularly give tons of taxpayer money to organizations run by convicted felons and registered sex offenders. And the only reason I learn about this is from local media. For some inexplicable reason, this stuff hardly ever makes its way to National Review or Breitbart even. And then he goes on to say a point I thought it was interesting. He said that, and I don't know if I fully agree, but he said that basically he says it's not like the modern Democrat Party even is really big on pro government at this point. It's all about high taxes, he says, and sending that money to inefficient, corrupt NGOs. So he says you wind up with the worst of all worlds. You get no public services at the same time your taxes skyrocket. So I'm looking at that, and it kind of fits kind of what you're talking about there. And it also puts some of the onus on those who say they oppose this stuff, right? It's like, where's the journalism? This is the real work that nobody knows about. He says only local media will cover some of these deep corruptions going on in these states like you live in.
Yeah. And local media, local media mostly doesn't work at all and mostly doesn't cover any of that. The Los Angeles Times used to be a newspaper. The Los Angeles Times was famously for years called the Velvet Coffin, because they had all of these, they had like 1,000 editorial staff, and there were people who produced 3 or 4 stories a year, and everybody always wondered what they did for a living. And now you can't get them to cover anything. Like I've sent local journalists a bunch of information about things that are happening in my own town and around my own town. You can't get them to pay any attention to any of it. The waste is spectacular. It's everywhere. I read about some of it. Just trying to get to all of it is really hard. And one of the things I've written about is the decline of services, the decline of functioning service.
Yeah.
As government gets more and more expensive, it does less and less for you. The question of, why doesn't the right-wing media do more? Like the National Review, I've not read for years. I've given up on the National Review. I find that a lot of the people I talk to throughout media, we have a county supervisor, a woman named Lindsay Horvath, who's sort of never been anything but an activist.
Yeah.
Got out of Notre Dame 20 years ago with her degree in gender studies, and has spent her whole life she was appointed to a small town city council to fill a vacancy. She was a city council member in West Hollywood, which is like a 1.9 square mile city in Los Angeles County. And in 2016, small towns, you elect 5 council members and they rotate into the mayor's slot. Once each council member takes a turn being mayor, you don't elect a mayor. So she was the mayor in 2016, and as the mayor of West Hollywood, announced that she had ordered city staff to forbid Donald Trump to enter the city. That she had told them that if he attempted to pull a permit for a campaign event, they were to deny the permit and tell him that he was not allowed to enter the city of West Hollywood. And a bunch of newspapers picked it up. A bunch of news sources picked it up and ran the story that said Donald Trump banned from West Hollywood. And I said to people, I talked to a bunch of the reporters and editors who handled those stories, and I said, none of that really works. Like, can you show me the law that says that a small town mayor can ban someone from entering a city? And I said, we have a city manager form of government where the mayor is just someone who holds a symbolic post and shows up once a month for a council meeting. And council members aren't really allowed to give directives to city staff without going through the city manager. I found that all the people I talked to, like all of the professional journalists that I talked to, didn't really understand the idea of a city manager government.
Yeah.
Didn't really like, didn't really get the constitutional or legal questions about whether or not you could ban someone from a city. I find that sort of basic civics knowledge
Yeah.
isn't really present. So why aren't people digging deeply into questions about how money is spent and how government works and how services are delivered? I think people don't know that much about it. And so I think, being able to type up clickbait headlines about, trans kids and poems being banned is what you do when you don't know how to talk about the real things that are. There's a lack of knowledge. There's a lack of ability. There's a sort of lack of basic training in how things work.
It's the idiocracy kind of thing going in. Because it's like, you look at this Titanic submarine story, right? Where it's lost, and they don't know where it is. And I didn't really see too much about the story. And then when I would look in, I'm like, hey, goodness, everything is political now. It's all about, oh, they deserve to die. They deserve to die because they're wealthy. And I'm thinking,
There's a
this is
billionaire on
what
that submarine.
yeah,
Yeah.
this is what idiocracy sounds like. This is a
Yeah.
stupid, pathetic populace that is so decadent and angry and envy laden that they just can't see straight. They're looking at someone suffocating at the bottom of the ocean. Ah! I'm thinking, this is the mob. This is the mob spirit. That it's dumb. It just at such a basic level of stupefying idiocy, and that is baked into everything we have. So I think we're getting to the point where journalism's, I mean, it's already pretty much gone, but like you say, like even basic levels of journalism to like report on a corrupt city policy or some swindling NGO, you know, we're at such a dark age because we've demonized merit and many people have written about this, and you probably have too, about these things. Republicans keep saying we got to have merit, 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 but the laws of of these civil rights era laws have been baked into so much of everything that they're penalizing and they're legally requiring an assault, a vicious assault on any level of like achievement or merit in terms of power and income. So we are getting what we pay for, you know, and
Yeah.
we're getting an idiocracy, a journalism that doesn't know how to journal, doesn't know how to write, doesn't know what their government is, and that's what they're paid to be there. They're paid to come up with a scandal to satisfy the mob and their pathetic resentments.
So one of the other things that happens is that there's still, there are a few journalists who know how to do the job, I think. And going back to David Goldstein, going back to this great investigative reporter in LA, you see that when journalists actually dig up a piece of corruption, they actually dig up something that isn't working, they actually show you waste, fraud, and abuse. David Goldstein went out and we spend tens of thousands of dollars per year in California per homeless person.
Yeah.
Without ever reducing the homeless population. And David Goldstein went out and followed people around who work for the Los Angeles County government agency that serves homeless people, who they have a contractor who makes a bunch of food packages every day. And he followed around the large group of county employees who were supposed to distribute aid packages with food and medicine and hygiene equipment and hygiene products and stuff like that to homeless people. He followed them around for weeks and watched them driving around, texting, sitting in Starbucks, and then at the end of the day throwing the food and hygiene packages in a dumpster and not giving them to homeless people. And he confronted them on camera and said, like, why are you throwing away all of that stuff? Like every single day for the last 2 weeks, I've been following you, watching you throw all that stuff away. And when he does something like that, he gets public officials on camera and they say, I'm very concerned. And nothing changes. Nothing. Nothing. They don't defund the program. Maybe maybe a person gets fired symbolically. They don't change the way the thing works. He catches people all the time wasting money and doing fraudulent, ridiculous things. Nothing changes. When you catch people, nothing changes. The bullet train that we've been working on for 15 years now that just consumes tens of billions of dollars and never produces any track, just keeps going. So when you see that something isn't working, when you lay out clearly why it doesn't work, you sort of show the how, what, when, why, and where of the failure. Nothing changes. Nothing changes behind any of it.
Yeah.
And it is interesting to contemplate the rice bowls behind all of that stupid spending, and to think of who's getting paid and how they're getting paid.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of money in selling out your own people, and we have entered into this age of, we've been in here for some time, but it's really starting to seep into the bones of our society, of this deep antithesis to excellence. It's, I mean, as so, you go to these, it's like a hellscape. I mean, I've said this before. You go to a store to look for clothes, and they've got, the mannequins and models are people you would never want to aspire to be. In terms of like, oh my God, I don't want to go further down that path of overweight. Dear God. I mean, but they're saying, please embrace this. It's like hell, this feels like hell on earth. You know what I'm saying? It's like, what are they going to do? Have burn unit victims at some point, like fully burned, and be like, this is what you should look like, like from hell. And not to take away from people's pain and suffering, but the point is like, there's this deep, morose embrace of, like you were saying, the culture war as a cover for the fact that these con artists are just pickpocketing, and it's like there's this battle between, like, the forces of democracy have really overrun the limits that republicanism and constitutionalism were supposed to put to protect mob stupidity from baking into everything we do.
Yeah.
Because the mob does not respect excellence. You can't run a society with excellence in mind and have the mob make that decision. It doesn't mean that the people can make good decisions on some level as a collective thing, but not everything is up for the mob to touch in a normal society, because once it is, you just have to dumb down the mob and then sick them like a Rottweiler on anything beautiful, and you make a ton of money doing it.
Yeah.
That's what you're pointing out.
California, we have a state
By the
senator.
way, I'm in Florida, and it's a lot of corruption here too, but it's probably not to the same level in California, but you'd be surprised.
A lot of corruption everywhere. But California, like, I look at my mother lives in Arizona, where I think the state budget is around $7 billion a year.
Yeah.
And their population is about a fifth of Californians, or a sixth of Californians. And our budget in California has been, we are cutting back because we have a budget deficit over $130 billion a year. So our spending compared to other states is wildly disproportionate. We don't get more services because of it. We don't have better infrastructure because of it. I do wonder where it's going. So as much corruption as you may have, as much corruption as Arizona or Texas may have, California just throws around so much money and takes so much money to throw around that I think maybe we're competing with Illinois, but we are the sweepstakes winner for corruption. The state senator named Evan Lowe, who's been pushing a concept called social housing. And he is advancing his social housing bill through the
burglary or something.
Social housing is distinct from public housing in that public housing has historically been government-owned housing for the poor. And he says we've discredited the model of public housing because we have government-owned housing, but we select it for only the poorest and most dysfunctional people. And so public housing doesn't look good. You look at government-owned housing and you say, oh, that government-owned housing doesn't work because look how dirty it is, look how run down it is, it's crime-ridden. And he says that's because the way we run public housing, we select for the least functional people and fill public housing with them. But if we use the concept of social housing, and we had government-owned housing that was accessible to people of all social classes and income levels, you could see that government-owned housing works. So he is advancing a bill through the legislature to build a social housing infrastructure in California in which the poor live in government housing, the middle class live in government-owned housing, the upper middle class live in government-owned housing. More and more people throughout the class strata can live in government-owned housing, and then you'll see that government-owned housing works. Social housing. So we take more and more money and we put it in a single basket. You take housing that now is, broadly distributed through the market, through thousands or tens of thousands of market actors or millions of market actors. And you make more and more housing owned by the government. You put more and more of the economy in the single basket of the government. If you can capture the government, there's more and more money to get. If the basket of money that you can, as a crony, get your hands on gets bigger and bigger and bigger, as government grows, corruption grows, insiderism grows, cronyism grows. The wealthiest zip codes in the United States are concentrated in a ring around Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So why are we talking so much about social justice and a more fair society that has more government involvement in every sector of life? It's because it puts more and more money in a single basket that it's easier to buy access to by buying politicians.
Yeah. But you see so many folks seemingly aware of this now, at least online and stuff. Do you have hope that this is just a phase we're going to go through and excellence will be allowed to be legalized again in America, or achievement and merit? Because that's really the heart of everything, It's also government involvement in our society to the degree that it's entrenched itself, but and like that guy pointed out, a lot of this is being outsourced to these NGOs and nonprofit groups, which are even more inefficient at the loot that they get than the corporate partners. And so there's that, which is a big economic issue that the American people seem to not have any ability to stop any of it. And then you've got this issue, like, of this assault on merit, which together with the largesse of government and its cronies and this legalized assault on merit, that seems to be the recipe for this attack. And then the culture war stuff is the lullaby that lulls everybody into complacency with this decline, this disgusting stuff. So do you see this as a phase, and what would be the mechanism of change that would take place? Is it you starting your journalism? Are you going to start an investigative journalism outfit in California?
I don't see a mechanism for change. That's one of the, I don't see a mechanism for change. I don't see a mechanism for near-term change. It seems to me that societies that become corrupt and dysfunctional eventually just collapse. Like the question of the Cold War, did we defeat the Soviet Union? I think the answer to that is that the Soviet Union defeated the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc defeated the Soviet Union. Their model destroyed itself from the inside, and I feel increasingly that that's just where we go. That we have no mechanism for stopping any of this. Doesn't seem to particularly matter who you vote for, although, electing Joe Biden, selecting Joe Biden for the presidency shows you that you can vote your way, you can make the handbasket plummet into hell faster by voting, but I don't think you can make it stop descending by voting. I don't think we can vote our way out of it. I don't think there's an easy mechanism for fixing a deep cultural problem, but that over time it destroys itself. Over time it comes apart. Over time, a society without merit, that doesn't distribute resources on the basis of what works and what doesn't work, just falls apart.
Yeah.
And it certainly is loading up on greater and greater. It is burdened by a greater and greater debt, the greater and greater creation of false prosperity through fake money, and the financialization of everything, and the increasing degree to which the economy is people trading pieces of paper that say, "I owe you money." I don't think there's an easy solution. One of the things that interests me is the inversion of concepts that's happening. Language. When you see things collapsing, when you see things imploding, when you see a political system falling apart, being able to talk about it, being able to say, here's the problem, here's the cause of the problem, that's the beginning of any attempt you're going to make to fix it. And the fact that we cover things like the discussion of the rapid decline of infrastructure in California, with endless tweeting about Gavin Newsom being mean, is just a prevention of that discussion. But the inversion of the meaning of words, the rendering of language into meaninglessness, is happening with such frequency and such obviousness that I find it really interesting. There's a woman named Ruth Ben Guyot, who I'm sure I've mentioned to you before, who's a professor at NYU, who just endlessly fascinates me. She writes books about fascism and authoritarianism.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump was indicted, and he started criticizing the indictment, and he started criticizing the government agencies that were behind the indictment. And she said, as an expert on authoritarianism, I can tell you that Donald Trump criticizing the FBI and the Department of Justice is exactly what authoritarians do.
Yeah.
We need to have faith in the FBI. We need to believe in these agencies, because if we don't, the authoritarians will take over our society.
Yeah.
And I like, you can find dozens examples of that kind of expert discourse, of the experts saying, you need to trust the public health authorities and believe the public health authorities and take the vaccines that they tell you to take. Because if you don't take the vaccines and listen to the authorities, you're falling for the authoritarians and their tricks. If you don't have iron faith in government and believe everything the authority figures tell you, you're succumbing to authoritarianism. During the truck convoy, the Freedom Convoy in Canada, I was reading these columns describing what was happening, and people were saying, like newspaper columnists were saying, throwing this word soup together and saying that, a vicious mob of anti-government protesters had descended on Ottawa to attack law and order and attack the government and advance their authoritarian agenda. And clearly a crypto-fascist movement. So criticizing government is authoritarian, but believing in government absolutely and not questioning government at all is anti-authoritarian. And I'm sure we could think of other examples if we tried of words that have no meaning anymore. We've attacked and destroyed the root of their meaning.
Yeah.
If you question the FBI, you're an authoritarian.
Yeah. How many stupid people believe that sentence? Like, really? I mean, a lot of well-educated stupid people believe that. I mean, I don't. And when I say that, I mean sincerely. They listen to that sentence and they say, "Yep, that's exactly right." Is that a really large percentage of the population? I think most of the population just doesn't care, and they're not. They're too busy doing whatever.
There's a degree to which I think one of the things that I tell people to do, and that I try to do myself. I wrote a post recently titled "Go to America."
Yeah.
And I said, if you're sitting in front of your computer and all of your understanding of reality is coming through media,
yeah,
it's social media and news media and entertainment media, if everything you see about the state of the world is coming through a screen, turn all of that off and get in your car and go drive around for a week. Can't drive around for a week, go drive around for a weekend, go somewhere, interact with real people face to face. And one of the things that fascinates me about being alive in this moment is being on Twitter or being on it, reading through a news aggregator like Citizen Free Press, or looking at headlines and seeing crisis, 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 crisis. The crisis of red state legislatures attacking trans children. If you go just drive around and talk to people, you don't see any of the crisis. People are just living their lives, and it's mostly fine. And you could say that that's people sticking in their heads in the sand and not, understanding what's going on. Or you could say that to a significant degree, the disconnect between real life and media is the product of media faking reality and inventing crises and stirring up muck that's not real and inventing diversions. And trying to discern the difference between what you hear from media and what's really happening. I've been reading all week. There was this moment when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yeah.
And I've been reading in media about, this is the worst thing that's ever happened.
Yeah.
Joe Rogan let RFK tell his anti-vaxxer lies and spew his extremist discourse. And if you look at media, America is threatened by this, dangerous, bizarre, profoundly extreme anti-vaxxer fringe. This tiny minority that spreads these bizarre, dangerous theories, conspiracy theories about vaccines. But if you look at the population, 17%, something like that, and maybe up to 19% now of the population has gotten the bivalent booster, despite the fact that the CDC and the FDA and your county public health official and your governor and the news media and CNN and your local newspaper have all told you you've got to get the bivalent vaccine. At least 80% of the population has turned on the COVID vaccines and doesn't trust them, while the news media is telling you that anti-vaxxers are an extremist fringe. So we have sort of news media now telling us that 80% of the population is an extremist fringe.
Yeah, yeah.
So does that, trying to interpret that and trying to decide what it tells you, trying to decide if that means that people are disconnected or they're not paying attention, or it means that people have figured out that media is selling them fake reality and they're withdrawing from it as much as they can.
Yeah.
In a country of 330 million people, CNN now in prime time has 600,000 viewers.
Yeah.
They don't have 1/3 of 1% of the population watching them. And you could say that that means, oh, people aren't paying attention and they're not thinking about, important issues. Or you could say that it means that a lot of people have figured out that there are no important issues on the news and they're being fed nonsense. And it's some mix of the two, but I don't know how to identify the mix. I don't know how to figure out how much is people withdrawing from thinking and how much of it is people noticing that they're giving their time and attention to nonsense, to noise, to made up noise. So the bottom line for me is that from time to time, you should try to disconnect and find different realities. You should try to go interact with people face to face and see if what you're seeing in the news media, especially, you should go travel in red states and see if it's true that they're seething with bigotry and rage, yearning to exterminate LGBT people. Turn off media and go to reality.
I like that. Chris, I really appreciate talking to you. It's always a pleasure. And I want folks to check out your blog, chrisbray.substack.com. Always a pleasure.
Good to talk to you.